Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MythVision podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. I am joined today by Dr. Carla Ionescu.
Yay!
Welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. Look, we're going to be dealing with an absolute badass virgin goddess named Artemis.
Yes.
Artemis. I got to hit the Artemis to make sure that because I'll be like Artemis, got the southern accent, I can't help it. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what your expertise is, if you don't mind me calling you Carla for the episode. And we're going to learn one of the most important goddesses of the ancient world, learning the history behind her, what this means, why does this matter to us today? These kind of questions. But please introduce yourself.
Okay, so as you said, my name is Carla Ionescu. Very good, you did well. My PhD is in ancient history, and the focus of my PhD dissertation was the goddess Artemis. And since that time, she's continued to be the focus of my work. So once I finished my PhD and graduated, I then began teaching at York University in Toronto. And there I teach classical history, I teach classics, I teach philosophy, religious studies. So because my PhD is intersectional, there is a layer of early Christianity in there, classics, of course, some philosophy, and then some modern sort of theories of some feminist theory, but also methodology and how do we look at myth and Jungian theory and Freudian theory. So it has these multi-layers. So it allows me to teach all of those things. But
you have a bit of overlap though, and I like the cross-disciplinary aspect of trying to go and venture beyond probably just typical classics, or maybe seeing what's important, because I think, and I don't know if you feel this way, but I think I've interviewed hundreds of academics over the years, and yes, I am kind of an autodidact. I don't have the languages, but I am an autodidact, and we have our blind spots. We have our shortcomings. We sometimes can get rooted in a hypothesis and want to die on the hill of it, and we just don't know the broad, vast knowledge in the field on things. But I have a keen observation of learning from 100 different academics, the flaws and shortcomings that come from scholars who are isolated in their little cubbies and don't see the bigger world, the broader picture and things like that. So we have a skill that I think, we can help each other to try and maybe piece these puzzles together. Why are we at odds is the point I'm asking. And so,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So when I went to do my PhD, my academic mentor said to me, what do you want to study? Because if you go into classics, you have to really focus, for example, on dates and times and usually wars, or you get really closely with translation, things like that. And I said, no, I really want to look at Artemis, but I particularly want to look at the transitional aspects of her, the liminal spaces that she takes up in. I want to look at how she affects people, how rituals took place, all these kinds of things. And so he says to me, well, that kind of sounds like intersectional, humanities, perhaps intersexual as well. And so I thought, oh my gosh. And so one of the things that he said to me is, it's going to be tough to find work as an academic if you can't be narrow, right? Because then you can't fit in a specific category. And so perhaps this is also why I teach a variety of courses across different platforms. But I really wanted to see what it was like to experience the ancient gods in the ancient world, not just from a date perspective, or even in archaeology. For example, archaeology focuses very much on rocks and measurements and sediment and, exactly the way an artifact was found and things like that. And that's very helpful to me to have someone else design that, right? Put that together, because then you could take that and then look at ritual and then look at different aspects of humanities and philosophies and put it together.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of chose to stay in the middle. I didn't go one way or the other. I think in the long run it worked out okay, but now as academia is really struggling, I'm now teaching online and teaching other people who want to come and learn other things, right, that are sort of multidimensional. So we're in a weird space, I think, as academics. Yeah,
and I hope that more people online will find. I know the medium might change on how you can enter into a university and be in a actual seat in an actual building. At some point, everything might end up remote, which then, in my opinion, could potentially actually give more opportunities to more people. But look, we can get into these nuts and bolts of all the academic institutions. I need to give a shameless plug to your book, first of all, She Who Hunts. Artemis, the goddess who changed the world. That's a bold claim. She changed the world, right? Well, of course, so is my title with why Artemis might be history's most dangerous virgin, right? We're a little sensational here, but why did you write this book? What's this book talk about? And then I have a follow-up question.
Okay, so that's actually that ties in really well, because I self-published this book. And the reason why I self-published this book was because I wanted to write it exactly how I wanted to write it. And when you are going through an academic press, you have to mold to whatever their expectations are, number one. And I really wanted to write it this way. And one of the things that I wanted to say, which has now been more and more evidence over the last 2 years that I've been traveling and mapping her temples and et cetera, even more, is that she is actually a much more influential, important, fundamental goddess, particularly for the ancient Greeks, but in many areas of the Mediterranean, Anatolia, the Roman Empire, even up in the Balkans, the Middle East. And so I really wanted to have the freedom to say that up front. Now, this is just like an introduction on the Greek Artemis, this book. And so if you're into the Greek Artemis and you want to learn sort of some background information that you don't always get when you look up mythologies, right? Then I think it's an easy read. And then I'm going to build on that. So I have a few different volumes prepared, because the more I travel, the more I go on this mapping project, the more I go up and climb to her temples and talk to the locals, the more I'm learning about more and more aspects of her. So there's a growing and expanding library. Yeah.
Okay, so the question is her.
Yeah.
Who is Artemis?
So let's start off with the easy questions, Derek.
Yeah.
I think traditionally she is recognized as the hunter goddess. So she's seen as a virgin maiden hunter. And in most depictions that we have, certainly the Roman ones that we have, she's often seen with a bow and arrow, with some dogs or a deer. She wears like a short skirt, a chiton, and she's famous for being a part of the woods, being part of the wild women, being the sister of Apollo, the twin sister of Apollo. She's the daughter of Zeus, so she's an Olympian. I think traditionally that's the way I grew up. And I grew up with Greek mythology, and that's the way I saw her. And when I was doing my research, trying to figure out, so I went into my research looking at the Virgin Mary, because I grew up Catholic, and I wanted to trace the Virgin Mary backwards, blah, blah, blah. And every time that I went back, I bumped into Artemis. And so I thought, exactly like you said, I was like, well, who is Artemis? I thought she's a hunter goddess. What does this have to do with anything? And the more I researched, the more I found out about her, the more I was like, why aren't people making a bigger deal about her? Why, because she's fascinating and just everywhere. And so that really got me down this rabbit hole. And then it really, at this point, I think some people would say it's either a pilgrimage or obsession at this point, because, she's become my entire everything, right? My entire
life. Yeah. You could say she's come to life for you personally.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Okay. Yes. And you wouldn't say that. So I got my PhD about 9 years ago now. You wouldn't say that if you knew me as an academic, because that part of me is very rigid, right? Very skeptical.
Yeah.
Right. And I was very much like, no, and, but I would say that, yes, absolutely. Over time, and the more I dive into it and the more I travel to these places, the more real she's become. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really good. So we think some just think because of the Roman art, bow and arrow, she's got a dog or she's hunting, that's cool. Yeah. But you're saying, nah, there's way more than just bow and arrow hunting. And I think it might be important to give some people a place we can start. And then how far back does this goddess go? What kind of roles can we see that she plays throughout mythology, throughout temples, throughout everyday life, and not just the stories about her, things like that. But like, maybe we can get into some of that. And I don't know if the PowerPoints you sent me cover some of this. Should I? It
does. For sure it does. Okay. Yes. So we can bring up the slides. I think most people are familiar with her as a twin sister of Apollo. Her mother is Leto. So Zeus impregnates Leto, and she is pregnant with twins. And then Leto supposedly has to run and escape jealous Hera. And as she's trying to escape jealous Hera, no one is giving her a safe space to give birth. She's very pregnant. She's looking for a safe space to get birth. Maybe this sounds a bit familiar, right? There's no room at the inn, right? There's no room. No one's giving her any room.
Mary, in case people are missing it.
She ends up on the island of Delos, where she gives birth to Artemis first. Artemis comes out fully formed, as gods tend to do. And then she helps her brother be born, right? And so she was often associated also, she was seen as the goddess of childbirth, and she is, as we'll see. And she assists in childbirth. She's a protector of children. She's a protector of youth, all that kind of stuff. What's really fascinating, so that story usually ends there. Artemis and Apollo are born, and they're, doing their respective duties. But what's really fascinating is that a lesser known story is that Artemis and Apollo end up going back to all the people that wouldn't host their mother to give birth. And they either cause havoc for their lives, they kill a couple of people, they attack a couple of people. They're very, very protective of their mother. Very, very, both of them. So there's lots of legends when the two of them return to some of the islands or villages where the kings of those spaces wouldn't give their mother space, and they wreak havoc for them. And so I think that's more the popular story. And then Artemis goes on to be seen as a goddess of the wilderness, of the mountains, obviously of the hunt. So she both blesses a hunt. So if you're a hunter, you would worship Artemis, you would leave an offering. And she also hunts. She herself hunts, and she has her own favorite, for example, deer. She has her own pack of hunting dogs. She is very famous and often associated with bears. So she becomes part of the wilderness. So that's the classical aspect of Artemis. How long ago did she arrive? Well, okay, so that's a little bit harder. So I would say the peak of her worship is 5th century BCE. So we're talking, classical period Greece, and she goes all the way well into the early Christian period. But I would say that we could trace her back to the Bronze Age as the mistress of animals, the Potniatheron. So I don't know, maybe 35 to 5,000 years ago. There's always a goddess of the wilderness. There's always a goddess of animals. There's always some goddess that is associated with the wild, and Artemis sort of spawns out of that, right? There's no real date where we can say, here is the time when the word Artemis or the name Artemis started being in use. We have like a few hundred years there between the Minoans and the Greeks, but and her name is not Greek by origin. People argue a lot about where her name comes from.
Interesting. By the way, I can't see you. When they share a PowerPoint like this, it takes the whole screen up. So I'm looking at this image right here, though, and from this angle, either she's riding the back of an animal, or it's hard to see. Like maybe she's not. But
you have to close the PowerPoint for a second.
Okay. Let me close this thing and come back to you. So okay.
So this is her here. Okay.
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 There we
So
go.
this is my little. So see, there's a deer behind her. That's a
Gotcha.
deer, right? So this is my little Artemis. I've named her Artemis Peripatia. I bring her to all the temples with me. Someone had gifted her to me before I left on my first expedition to the temples. And the image on that first slide that you share is her standing at her temple, the ruins of her temple in Thermos, Greece. So there she is standing in the corner. And actually, we're looking out on the Temple of Apollo. Because one of the things that's become very clear to me that maybe was not as clear in classic writing is that everywhere where there's a Temple of Apollo, there's a Temple of Artemis. Now, and I also have to say, Derek, that it is very likely that she predates Apollo, right? So,
wow.
When the Greeks arrive on scene, when they start to call themselves, when they start to create this Olympic pantheon, they, how do I say this? They marry off a lot of the goddesses that were already local and in the region. Okay. Artemis, though, for some reason, perhaps because she was the mistress of animals and mistress of the wild, and she's quite scary, actually, they didn't marry her off. They gave her a twin brother, right? And so she and Apollo become this kind of interesting sibling relationship, but they're not particularly close, although interestingly, they also now have temples together. So there's
that's interesting
layering here that's happening.
So technically, we could say at some point this outsider deity,
Yes.
the goddess of the hunt or the goddess of the woods, gets drawn into the pantheon in which what we would call Greeks, but they may not have called themselves that at the time.
Right.
Are we talking Dark Age or Bronze Age period?
We're even talking past the Bronze Age. So maybe we can start somewhere in the Iron Age and move forward into because in the Bronze Age, we're talking Minoans, although they didn't call themselves Minoans either. And then the Mycenaeans. And I would say the Mycenaeans is probably the beginnings of what we call the Greeks today.
Okay.
And so that happens around just at the end of the Bronze Age as the Minoan Empire starts culture starts crumbling and the Mycenaeans take over. But, again, the Greeks are living separately. They've got these separate communities. They've got these separate villages with separate kings and leaders, right? So they're living in these. They wouldn't have called themselves Greeks. We're just doing that now, right? But the worship of Artemis would have been also in all of these different villages and these different communities, and they gave her different epithets and they called her different things. Artemis something, Artemis Orthia, Artemis Phosphorus, Artemis Lunatis, etc.
Okay, so a couple things. We do have some super chats, right? Which are going to be questions we're going to get to. But I think it'll be important and good to see my boy Gnostic at Form in the house. So he wants you back. That's part of the super chat. We'll repeat this when we get there. Look, we have almost 1,200 people who are watching right now live. I ask each and every one of you, consider getting her book, She Who Hunts, and let us know. Leave a review on Amazon. Say, hey, this book was amazing. Or say, this book was absolutely amazing. Don't say anything else. We ask you kindly. So if you don't mind, let's go through these slides together.
Okay.
I might have a few questions myself and throw out a few things. Maybe we even get in a little does this goddess have any recognition to Bible? I think you hinted at something interesting about the whole birth stuff with Mary, maybe, but maybe we get into some other stuff.
Okay.
And then we'll get to the Q&A section and have some fun. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Let's do it. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I will not be able to see your face. I'll pretend that I am for everyone. I'll just be like, wow. Whoa. But I am going to do that to the slides. So here we go.
Okay. Okay. So so this is a modern statue, right? At the Temple of Thermos. So the Temple of Thermos we actually found on this expedition. And so I use this picture because it's new and it's a site that people don't visit. I would love for people to go visit when they go to Greece. And so if people want actually to go off the beaten path when they travel, that would be great. I have lots of suggestions. So this is one of the examples of how many temples to Artemis there are that are not widely known.
And by the way, you do tours or
I'm
something like that.
starting next year. Yeah,
Okay.
there's been a bunch of requests. Now, I do have to tell you that when I go on the expeditions, they're not as exciting as they sound, but the tours that I am working on with another friend should be a little more exciting, because when we're looking for sites, sometimes we find nothing.
Got it.
Right. And so, but anyways, yes, starting
Okay.
next year, we're going to do some touring to some of these off the beaten path places.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's important that we take people, I think, to these places, you know.
I
They're
agree.
mostly empty. Sometimes the guards just look at us and go, "What are you doing up here?" You know? And I'm just like, I came to see the temple. So this slide is, we were talking about her representation. So I wanted to give you a couple options. The most classic one, of course, is the one with her deer and when she's reaching for her bow and arrow. And you see there's a few of those like that. And then there's a lot of them in this pose of her hunting or pulling an arrow. That's quite popular as well. The ones that are mostly offered at her temples are these standing ones that you see where she's holding a fawn in her hand. There are thousands of these, like thousands. Most of them are shoved in the back of museum storerooms, but thousands of them. And then there are some that don't look like her at all. Like this one that's here from Brauron, she looks really serious. She's just kind of standing. She's looking down. While there is a similar thread in some of her depictions, there's also a variety of depictions that encompass her, I would say, her independence. The dress alone, the fact that she has a short skirt most of the time above her knee is really the short skirt. That is a symbol that is associated, I'm trying to think before I say this, but pretty much only with her. Aphrodite is usually naked. Athena is usually fully dressed with her armor. Hera's always sitting down. So, but Artemis has this short hunting dress, or short katana, as they call it, with these kind of interesting wrappings and interesting knots around her body. And there's a whole school of thought about the knots around her body and the knots that she sometimes has on her in the front of her shirt. So anyway, those are sort of longer interpretations, but that's her easiest representation. So if you're in a museum and you see that, you're probably looking at Artemis.
Okay.
This is just to remind me to talk about the mapping project. So this is the Google map that I'm building. So it's publicly accessible. We have already found a ton of temples, but I'm doing one every 2 weeks just because it takes a little bit of time to put it up there. But what I hope to do with this map is two things. Number one, I hope to fill in every single temple that we find on the expeditions so that everyone could see the massive amount of temples built to this goddess. My argument, my academic argument, is going to be that she has more temples offered to her than any other Olympian. But not yet, because I need evidence for that, but I'm collecting it. And the other thing the reason why I put it on Google like this is that if you go to Greece, anybody opens up their Google and they have this map on there saved, you could look around and see if there's a temple of Artemis around where you are. And in there, I write a little description of what it is and also how difficult it is to get to, because some of them are extremely difficult and some of them are not. And so I'm hoping, again, that people go visit them. If they're in the neighborhood or in the, they're looking for something to do while they're, and then we're going to do one in Italy and we're starting one in Turkey. And so wherever you are, you might go to visit a temple of Artemis. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the beginning. Yeah. So this is kind of what we were talking about, who she is traditionally speaking, as she's one of the 12 Olympians. So she is, I think, quite important. And I would say that she's one of the favorite daughters of Zeus. There's a story in which when she's little, although I know I said she was born an adult, but there's also these other legends around her, when she's sitting on Zeus's lap and she says something like, so I want to live outside the city and I want like 60 nymphs to be my entourage. And I never want to marry and I never want to answer to anybody. And I want this and this and that. And so she makes a list of demands of Zeus. And he goes, okay, you can have everything you want. And that's quite unique because she is the only one of the 12 Olympians. that demands something of her father and receives it without any argument, and then goes off and enjoys that existence.
Wow. That's pretty wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She, from the beginning, she seems to have this mysterious authority that, and independence. Like she's not really held down by anything. Yeah, she's the mistress of the wild, but I mean, that's just, hunting and wandering around and hanging out with people. But, she comes to protect women and children. Yes. And she's connected to childbirth and to different transitions and things like that. But she very much does that out of her own accord. Right. So she has this kind of sovereignty that makes her fascinating. And, she also sometimes kills people and likes really violent things and is quite bloody. She's a very bloody goddess. And again, she doesn't answer to anyone for those things.
Wow. Okay. I've got questions. We're gonna get there.
Okay. So, this is one of the most famous aspects of her is at Brauron, which is Ravona, which is just outside of Athens, about 45 minutes outside of Athens. It's a really great site and it's a fantastic museum. So if anybody's in Athens and they want to go for a little drive, this is the Festival of the Bears. So here we are told that young women pretended to be bears for Artemis every spring. And they were called Arctea or Arcteas, which is little bears. And we're told traditionally that this is a ritual in which young women transition from little girls to marriageable age, right? So this is a puberty ritual. And Artemis is associated with puberty rituals for boys and girls. But here at Brauron is it was so big, this transition ritual, that eventually it became a festival, and then eventually it became a big procession. So Brauron is about a 45-minute drive outside of Athens. So from the temple of Brauron, they would walk to the temple of Athens. Okay? And then they would have a celebration up on the Acropolis. So up on the Acropolis, there is a temple to Artemis Brauronia, which no one ever talks about. And if you ever go up to the Acropolis, it's not labeled. It's there though. It's there. So on the big label, when you're down at the bottom, it says the Temple of Artemis. When you go up to the top, though, the actual site itself is not labeled. So again, another example how she is one of these fascinatingly important goddesses, because this procession was widely funded, and a lot of money was invested. People were fed, parties, comedies. Everyone wore yellow dresses, particularly young women, singing, dancing, all of this kind of stuff that went on. It was one of the most important festivals of the year. And it's all for Artemis.
Big stuff. I know Neil Gnostic Inform in the chat's going, he just came from Greece. So you and him both did. Yes, he was in Athens. He stayed in Athens. He went all over.
Amazing.
By the way, we're going to be doing tours over there as well. That's why I was asking. I was like, okay, at some point, maybe we could find the time is right and the stars line up and make something,
That would be amazing.
Especially if it's a place that you worked on and you're like, look, let me show you kind of the inner, we could make something happen. That'd be cool.
That'd be awesome. Yes.
Okay. What happened?
So here we have the story of Iphigenia, and I've kind of given it to you a little backwards in the slides, but that's okay. So when you go to Brauron, there is this side cave of Iphigenia. And so people go there and they're like, oh, who is Iphigenia? Who is this priestess of Artemis? And so this is why for a couple of slides, I've put some images for you of Iphigenia at Aulis. Yeah. So, okay, go forward a little bit.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay.
I'm going to go for it.
Let's go here. Okay. I use the biblical image here, but okay, because it's very much the same thing, because it reminds me of fathers sacrificing their children, but that might be a side story. So this is the Temple of Artemis at Aulis. It's a closed site, so we had to get permission to go inside, and when we finally got permission to go inside, the guy that came to unlock the site for us got the wrong keys. So then he had to go back and get the, anyway, that's a longer, silly story. And then we went inside and we were filming and things like that. But this is where Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks, when they're attacking Troy, stopped, right? Because they were all collecting themselves over there. All the Greeks were getting ready to leave. And he offended Artemis because either he shot her favorite deer or he bragged that he was a better hunter than her. Either one of those legends is true. Anyway, she got really pissed off. I think the most popular one is that he killed her favorite deer.
Right.
And so she wanted, in exchange for that deer, the daughter of Agamemnon, his youngest daughter, Iphigenia. And so Agamemnon, apparently he's really distressed because he doesn't want to kill his youngest daughter. But anyway, eventually everybody else is saying, listen, if you don't do this sacrifice, Artemis is not going to allow the wind in our sails. So we can't go to Troy and then we can't kill all those people, right? So he calls home, I say that in quotation marks, to his wife, Clytemnestra, and says, listen, can you send Iphigenia to the front lines? I'm going to marry her to Achilles. Achilles is the great hero of the Greeks. Yeah. And Clytemnestra goes, oh, that's a good marriage. Iphigenia is maybe 14 years old. Some people say she's 12 years old, etc. She's a young woman. She comes to the front of the battle scene. To the front of where the army is, or the naval ships are getting ready to go, trusting her father and realizing that something is not right because Achilles doesn't want to have anything to do with her. And he places her on the altar. And he's about to stab her. He's about to kill her. And at the very last minute, as the knife is coming down, we're told that Artemis comes in and swoops up Iphigenia and puts a deer or a fawn in her place.
I have never heard this story before. Sorry to interrupt. Please.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
You've never heard this story before. Okay.
I'm teasing, sarcasm. I'm not only I have heard this example, but I'm saying this is. You get where I'm going with this in terms of like Bible, other stories. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yes, right.
I interrupted you though. Swooped up the fawn, or there was a deer.
That's right. That's right. So she places this deer instead. So there are some stories. There are some older stories that are quite harsh and actually say that Agamemnon does kill his daughter, and that Artemis takes like her spirit, or takes her and turns her into a constellation, or takes her to Mount Olympus. So there's always this kind of appeasement at the end. But a more popular story is that she replaces Iphigenia with a deer. People feel a lot more comfortable with that. And then still takes Iphigenia and brings her to Brauron, where I've just shown you the cave in that last slide. Mm-hmm. And that there, Iphigenia becomes one of her priestesses. There's also another story that she sends her off to where Orestes is, and that Iphigenia becomes the priestess of Artemis Tauropolis there. So there's the main idea of this is that Artemis has taken a young woman and made her own priestesses, her own goddess, her own leader of her movement. But also the lesson, I think, for many was not to piss off Artemis, because either way, Agamemnon has lost his daughter. And as I'm sure you know, when Agamemnon returns victorious from Troy, Clytemnestra is still super, super pissed about him sacrificing her youngest child and ends up stabbing him in the bathtub, as she should. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So this is sort of the family of Agamemnon has a long history, lots of tragic history there. They piss off a lot of gods, a lot of bad things happened. But this was the final straw for Artemis. So this is one of the examples in which not only is she fearsome, but she has the ability to stop the wind, to stop this massive Greek army, and to make all of these rulers or leaders, particularly Agamemnon, commit this crime to make up for his offense of killing her deer. So it's one of the examples, it's one of the more powerful examples of her fearsomeness, I guess you could say.
Yeah. the one thing that comes to mind too is this idea. There's like symbolic reality behind the myth, like you said, in the worship, in the priestess. Her role is that of Iphigenia in a way, and she dies, or in this myth is saved as a virgin. She doesn't sleep with Achilles. So just like the goddess herself, who's a virgin, which we got to get into that as well. I'm kind of curious to know more about. Yeah, in fact, let me save my questions for when we're finished with the slide, so we could. I feel better if I could see you while we're doing it. You know.
Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Let's see what else I have. So this is just my little Artemis at the site of Aulis, which is still, like I said, it's still a great site. It's a fantastic site, but they don't let anybody visit it. They don't let anybody inside. So, okay, let's keep going. Let's see what else I have. Oh, the Spartan ritual for Artemis Laphria. Yes, very good. So the Spartans also worshipped Artemis. Again, a little known fact. Not a lot of people know that Spartans, which are this great military community or tribe, worship the goddess Artemis. You'd think they would worship someone like Mars or Ares. Okay, Mars, Ares, same one. But no, they worship Artemis because she is quite vicious. And here in Sparta, they worship Artemis Laphria. Laphria means sort of erect, standing. So they have these, we're told that they had these statues, small statues of her that's kind of standing up, like you see in some of these images. But the bloody ritual that happens here is that this is also a ritual of a puberty ritual, but for boys. And what happens, in short, is, because I talk about it more in the book, but the priest of Artemis stands in the middle of this circle, okay, holding the wooden statue of Artemis Laphria. Okay, all of the young men within the community, within the tribe, 13, 14 years old, go around in a circle around the priestess, whipping themselves, right? Whipping themselves bloody until they start passing out. So two things are happening at the same time. Number one, it's who can last the longest under their own self-flagellation. Number two, the priestess who's standing in the middle, of course, takes all of the bleeding that's happening all around, but she's holding this statue and she has to say, because the statue is also collecting all this blood that's spraying around, and she has to say when Artemis has had enough, has filled herself with blood. And usually it's sort of like a last man standing thing. So this can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. I don't know, because we don't have exact timing. What we know is that it would go on until there's a few of the young men standing. And these young men would have sort of the honor of having survived the ritual with their honor intact. And the priestess will say, okay, the goddess has had enough. She has got her fill of blood. And then they take the cult statue back inside. So that's bloody Artemis in Sparta.
Wow.
Yeah. They also used to come before her here. This is the temple site in the background. It's a small temple site, and make offerings before they went to battle to her. So, again, you would think maybe Athena, maybe Ares, but no, it's Artemis. Because I think Artemis is bloodthirsty, because Artemis is a goddess that gets into the gruesomeness, right? And while the other Olympians fight, there's lots of, instances in which the other Olympians fight. Artemis is not just a fighter. She's just she has this skill, the hunting skill, the hunter wild skill, that for some reason seems to be much more relevant to groups like the Spartans, but even Agamemnon and the Greeks crossing to Troy. They seem to rely on her much more heavily for blessings and protection in their battles.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
More questions come to mind, of course. So many interesting ideas come to my head on this.
So this is one of my favorite Artemis. Okay, so this is a story in which this translates into Artemis strangled, which sounds kind of scarier than it actually is, because she's not the one that's strangled. But what it really means is that she has the ability to stop blood, to not bleed, and to stop others from bleeding. Okay, in this embodiment. So there's a long story, but I'll make it short, where there was a bunch of kids and they were near one of the Artemision temples, and they threw some rocks either at the cult statue or at the temple, and they broke parts of it. And the locals killed the children thinking that Artemis would be pissed off. But in fact, Artemis gets so angry that she strangles the wombs of all the women in the village. That is, all the women stop bleeding. None of them can get pregnant. There's no children. There's nothing else until she is appeased. Okay. And then they make a great deal of offerings to her. They sacrifice a bunch of animals to her. They offer a bunch of animal blood to her until she is appeased and releases the hold on the wombs of these women. Okay. So you think, okay, great story. But if you're thinking about an agricultural society or a warrior society, the inability to have offspring is pretty much fatal. It is the end of your community. So what we know then is that Artemis has the ability to end life or to give life, which, again, for a so-called little hunter goddess, this is quite the powerhouse.
Yeah, much more is going on. That's like Dionysus, again, like we talked off air. Oh, he's just the god of wine.
Right.
That's all.
Right.
And it's like, you really don't know what you're talking about if that's all you think that Dionysus is, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm taking you here on these slides is a few, because obviously we can't do them all.
Of course.
A few of some. So hopefully I'm giving you some idea of the different ways in like different poles of the way that she was thought of and worshipped. And then there's all these other things in between. Yeah.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah.
This is Artemis Phosphorus. So Phosphorus is a Lightbringer, right? One of the ways in which she is often depicted but not talked about is carrying torches. So Lightbringer, Phosphorus, this idea of bringing of the dawn, carrier of the light, illumination, is pretty much a creator terminology. So creator gods, life and death gods, Lucifer, for example. Lucifer is, it comes out of Phosphorus tradition. So we have this idea that like starlight, starbringer, lightbringer, that kind of idea is an illumination, is a powerful divinity. And Artemis Phosphorus is one of her more popular names. So she's celebrated as Phosphorus at Eleusis, where the Eleusinian mysteries were performed. She's celebrated as Brauron.
You just broke up.
No, but can you hear me now?
Yep. Just a couple sentences back.
Okay, so what was I saying? So she's celebrated as Phosphorus in a variety of places. One at Eleusis, where the Eleusinian mysteries take place. She's Phosphorus in Mycenae, in ancient Mycenae. She's Phosphorus of Brauron. Why is this important? Because this is not a hunter goddess then. If she is celebrated and as Artemis Lightbringer, then she is a creator goddess because she is bringing light to the darkness. She is also often celebrated as a salvation goddess. So her name sometimes is Artemis Sotera, Artemis the Savior. So, when we think about the Savior, right? When we think about salvation gods, we don't think about Artemis. And yet here she is repeatedly. So all these 4 images that I have here on the slides are from different temple sites. Here she is repeatedly celebrated as Lightbringer and Savior. So
I'm thinking of there's so many things that come to mind, of course, here, but the specific myth with Prometheus, of course, with the light bearer, of course, yes. You have another Lucifer aspect pertaining to him and enlightenment, but bringing salvation to humanity. So it just seems like the way that the Greeks operated, or these, not just the Greeks, but like the people in this region, and I imagine it's everywhere, is there's just so many different legendary kind of mythic elements that you would see passed around or applied to different gods, different cults. Yeah. This is a big one right here. Yeah. Real big.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to bring light to the darkness in a time when there's no electricity, where light is life and fire is life in every way, from light to cooking to seeing in the dark, every way that you can think of it metaphorically, and literally, to be a light bringer is powerful, much, much more powerful than a young virgin maiden hunting in the woods. Right?
I like this.
Yeah.
I like this.
Okay. Oh, and this actually, I don't know if this video works. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. So this is at one of her temples, Phosphorus. If you click the little thing, okay. So I'm not
here.
Yeah. So basically, what I'm doing here.
Okay.
This is the temple. I'm just walking around this little temple of Artemis Phosphorus at Mycenae. And I'm going to take you in a little circle. And what that's doing is it's duplicating these statues in the background at the museum. So these statues you see in the background at the museum used to be on top of these columns that you see there. And they were offered to Artemis. So what people used to do at her temples is create these statues of young women, whether they were priestesses or daughters of the elite or daughters of anyone that could afford it. And they would put them, you could see all these columns that are standing. There would have been much more, of course. This is today, right? What's left today, what we've dug up. And all of these bases have prayers or inscriptions on them saying, I, so-and-so, make this offering of either my daughter or the priestess, whatever her name is, to the goddess Artemis. And this space here that I'm standing in would have been full of these small, of these life-size, not small, statues of young women. And that's part, so that's an interesting aspect, because here she's Phosphorus, so here she's Lightbringer, and the offerings that are made inside the temple are all of young women and priestesses. Wow. So it's unclear what the intention, other than, of course, protection, might have meant for those who made these offerings. But it's fascinating that you would have had temples full of these statues that look like the real person who they're being offered for, right? And wow. That's inside one of the temples. And what's fascinating is this. So this temple is on the site of Asclepius. Okay, so this is called the Asclepion in Mycenae. I knew there was one temple to Artemis here, which is this temple here that I'm in. But when we arrived on site, Derek, there is another temple just beside this one, literally just beside it, to Artemis or Thea. So that's two temples on the site of Asclepius. And Artemis and Asclepius are always together too. I mean, she is everywhere. And then we found a sign that said, if you go up the mountain, there is a temple about 1 kilometer away to Artemis Limnatis. So we were like, okay, that's a third temple. When we got to the third temple, there was a sign that said, if you keep climbing, because this one was a longer climb, if you keep climbing, there is a temple, a sanctuary, a small sanctuary to Artemis Eleuthia. So that's the goddess of childbirth. That's her representation of child. So we kept climbing and found the ruins of this temple of Artemis Eleuthia. And so 4 temples within a 2-kilometer radius, and visitors or tourists are taken there and told, oh yeah, we're going to go visit the temple of Asclepius. And so, of course, my obsessive self said, but there's 4 temples to Artemis here. And there's no temple to Zeus there. There's no temple to Ares there. There's no temple to Athena there. So, again, part of my work, I hope, in the end, is to prove that actually, for some reason, she seems to be the most popular goddess, certainly in the Mediterranean space, certainly in Greece. We'll see about Italy and Turkey and other places. But
I like this. I do. I really hope that, I mean, obviously, I know you do too, but you go with the evidence. But I do hope you're right. It'll be really cool to find out, like, what are we missing, right? Yeah. These are questions that come to my mind. It's like, what are we missing about this? Why did they have this goddess as so important in so many temples?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what some of my questions will be as soon as we wrap up the slides here. Is a couple things that might help us try to understand from you what aspects of her and why is she so significant. So
yeah, it's fascinating to me as well, because why would you need two temples side by side? So obviously she played key roles in different aspects of the experiences of the people within these towns and these cities. Obviously.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what else I gave you. Artemis Laphria. Okay. This is a reproduction, so it's Roman, but it's said to be a copy of Artemis Laphria. Okay, and at first she looks like a hunter, right? She's great. She looks great. It's one of my favorite statues. From a mystical perspective, it is a statue that I couldn't stop staring at, that I lost time looking at. So my traveling partner, who is very much an atheist and a skeptic, she says to me, she came up to me while we were in the museum and I was looking at the statue, and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, "I can't stop staring at the statue. She's dragging me in. I don't know what she wants from me. She wants something from me." And she's just looking at me like, "You have lost your mind, Carla. I've seen you do some crazy things, but this is..." So I don't know what it is about the statue, but it had an energy that was powerful.
Right.
But the reason why I brought her up is because she represents Artemis Laphria. So Artemis Laphria is from a place called Calydon in Greece. Okay. Her temple, her initial temple, is at the top of this hill, this kind of mountain. In Greece, there's different layers of mountains. So let's call it a middle mountain. Okay. When they first discovered this temple on top of this mountain, Derek, they went, "Oh, this must be a temple to Apollo," right? Because sometimes they have similar votive offerings. And because, like I said, sometimes people offer Artemis offerings at Apollo temples. Okay, a couple, decades go by and they found more and more votive offerings there. And they go, shit, this is definitely the temple of Artemis Laphria. And in fact, the temple of Apollo is down at the bottom of the hill and significantly smaller. Okay, so that made me feel better, except when I got to the museum and the labels had not been changed, which is another story for another day. Because museums, I have a whole thing on Patreon called Badly Labeled Artifacts, because sometimes things are labeled really terribly. Anyways, that's a side story. But Artemis Laphria, at the top of this mountain in Calydon, had one of the most devastating type of sacrificial rituals. One of the things that they did for her Laphria festival is that when they made the offerings and the sacrifices of all kinds of animals, from deer, dogs, I don't know, goats, etc., they would create a pyre, a big sort of closed off pyre, and they burnt all of the animals alive. So this is one of the few rituals for any god in this particular time in the Mediterranean and the ancient world, where they burned the entire animal fully and together. And there are some stories by, mostly Pausanias, but a couple of the others, who say that when an animal tried to escape or run, they would bring it back. So this is a bit heartbreaking for me, because as an animal lover, I can't imagine this kind of ritual sacrifice. But there was something about Artemis Laphria that was, again, so frighteningly powerful that once a year they had to have this this sacrifice, this festival offered to her. And in fact, when they got run out of that place, the Caledonians, they moved over to Patras. And when they moved over, which is just across this canal, and when they moved over to Patras, they brought Artemis Laphria and this festival with them, and it lasted well into the Roman period.
Wow.
So there was some kind of completion, there was some kind of result or belief that allowed for this ritual, because over time people, practiced less and less and less animal sacrifice. They became more and more uncomfortable with animal sacrifice, but this particular one lasted well into the Roman period. So there was something here, a long tradition here, that for some reason the people felt it needed to be continuously honored in order for the goddess to continuously favor them.
That's some tough stuff.
It's hard.
Yes.
It's a hard one.
Whew.
Yeah. There's two of them, I think, that I'm telling you about today that are really tough. This one is the introduction.
Oh, wow. So it gets worse. It gets worse. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just digging up the information.
We have, I mean, humans are something, right?
Yeah.
Humans are something. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to hit next.
Next. And these are just some of the museum artifacts. I just kind of wanted to share with you the different layers of things that you can find at a temple site. So one of the things, so these are all decorations at the top, the lions. This is the one lion here with the colors. That's a water spout. So that water would have come through. Lots of chariots, and on the paintings of the ceilings. And then you see these little votive offerings. Like I said to you, these are the most popular, thousands and thousands of them. It's just Artemis standing with a little fawn in her hand. And then here, the larger head with the crown on top, that's called a TK. So she is a goddess of the city. So things like that would have been offered. But the green bronze thing is the one that I kind of wanted to focus on, which is basically a dispute between these two families was resolved. And they wrote it in bronze. And they wrote their resolutions in bronze, and they left it in the temple of Artemis because, again, Artemis's role was an enforcer. So she's guardian and enforcer. So once you've agreed to this and you've written it in stone, written it in bronze, and you leave it at the temple, the understanding is that anybody that breaks this contract is punished by Artemis.
Ooh.
Right.
Well, nobody has. Look at this. Oh, or you mean specifically like when they made the agreement, those people.
Right. So it's almost like this would have been a contract in bronze, and they left it in the safekeeping of Artemis.
Got it.
So that she remains then the enforcer. So once you would have to forever be bound by this particular contract or piss her off, which, as we've seen, ends up really badly.
Clearly.
So here we have her as enforcer. Not just a hunter goddess. Yeah. This is a site up in Iphigenia. So when we were at one of the museums, we came across a temple to her that I'd never heard of. I have a list of all of her epithets, and there are about 300 of them. And then we were at this museum, and I saw this epithet, Iphigenia, and I said to the museum curator, "What the heck is this? I hadn't heard of this." And she goes, "Oh yeah, there's a temple to her there. There was a bunch of stuff found there, et cetera, et cetera." So we asked her, "Where is it?" And she gave us some idea. She basically said it's up a mountain at this crossroads, across from this hill, and behind this Greek restaurant. So I went and I climbed, Derek, and it took me 3 hours to find.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and so there's lots of footage of me finding these temples because I climb by myself. My travel partner doesn't climb. She has bad knees. So she sits and waits in the car and does her own work in the car. Because sometimes I'll be gone for 3-6 hours to find the place. So what we used to find this place, other than instructions from the museum, was an image from an old hotel who once took a bunch of people up here, and they had this image of the hill across, the small mountain across. And so I walked up this mountain and kept using that image to try and figure out which way I should go. Anyway, it took me 3 hours to find, but I found it. And so This is what remains today. Yeah.
How much do you think? I mean, I know I want to get the questions here soon, but like, I can't imagine how many of these temples do exist out there that they're overgrown, or we just haven't been able to find them, or
for sure.
You know what I mean?
For sure. Like I will have hundreds at the end of my mapping expedition, probably in the next 5 years. I will have hundreds, and there will probably be many, many that are still uncovered, so that no one has dug them up, or they've been covered up by time and earthquake.
Wow.
And sometimes what the archaeologists do is they call it a rescue archaeology, which is they will uncover a site, they will take what's there, and then they will recover it because they don't have enough funds to lock it up or protect it. So I will go to places where I have the GPS coordinates, but when I get there, it's an empty field.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I'll take a picture of an empty field at the coordinates and I'll put that on there. But I'll let you know on the map that you're just going to go see an empty field because they just don't have enough funding to cover or to fence off all. This place was fenced off, believe it or not, too, but the fence was crumbling. So I was able to get around the fence and go inside. But they just don't have enough. Yeah, they just don't have enough funding to protect some of the sites. So they cover them back up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like most humans get into this and get into the humanities and ancient history more, and there's more interest and more funding into this stuff.
Yes.
I hope at some
Yes.
point, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the purpose of my research, right? Is to, number one, to bring images to people who can't go, right? Because there's a lot of people that are like, Carla, I really like coming with you, which is why I also film everything because I feel like someone's with me as I'm climbing up. But also some people will not be able to travel. And so I would really like for them to be able to see what it's like, you know, that's very like raw because I'm not a great filmmaker. So I just videotape on my phone, right? So it's like very raw footage, like you're here with me. Here we are.
Yeah.
Right. And then also for people who can't travel, it would be amazing to go to some of these sites and support them. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Oh, and these are some of the things that were found at that site. So I just want to show you there's a little altar here. You see more of these votives. And then what you see here in the one corner, that is a relief of an animal sacrifice. So they used to create these reliefs of an animal sacrifice and then leave them at the temple as an offering. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. On this other corner, you see someone's name on a roof tile. That was one of the way that they would support the temple, is they would pay a certain amount and then they'd have their name inscribed in a roof tile. And that was one of the way that they funded the temples as well. So you can imagine the roof tiles on the temple would have had lots of names or dedications or inscriptions. And so I thought that would be kind of cool. And then that's a little sort of incense altar that they found at the site. At the site that I was just showing you.
Oh, the exact place we just looked at.
Yep.
Here. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently they have these larger statues, almost life-size. And apparently there was about 500 of them at the site. Now, where on that site they would have had 500 statues, I don't know. But they found like legs and feet. They have 3 or 4 of them that are intact. Well, without heads, right? Because, you know, the heads always get lost or taken. But they said they have about 500 of them. So they must have been up and down the mountain and around. Like they must have been, right? I mean, because that site is quite small. But yeah, and these are some of the other things that they found. Okay, so this is maybe my last scary story, yeah? Okay.
Oh, snap. Buckle up.
Can you go one more slide? Let me see.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start here for a second. So these are colossal statues. Okay, so they're larger than life. So like twice as big as I am. Let's say I'm 5'7". In the middle, you have Demeter and Despina. Despina means mistress, sometimes associated with Persephone. Okay, sitting down. And then on the side, you've got Artemis. You could see her holding a torch here. She has a dog and she's got some snakes. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. And on this other side, we have Anytos, who is a Titan who protects the mistress. Okay, so these massive 4 statues, what you see here is the head of Artemis, and we have the head of Demeter, I think. Go one more. Let me see if I can show you one more over. Yeah, okay. And then this here is the torso of Artemis. Okay, so they found 2 torsos, Artemis and Demeter, and they found their heads as well. Okay, go back one. These statues are these massive, massive statues on a mountain in Arcadia. Go back one. At the temple of Despina. Okay. Why do I tell you this? Number one, this site was immensely important because it had a mystery culture that predates perhaps even the Bronze Age. So some of the locals say that they had been worshiping these goddesses, Demeter, Despina, and Artemis, because Anytos is a guardian, but whatever, since before the moon. So very, very long standing. Okay. It's up on a mountain in the middle of nowhere. It is always closed as well. always closed. So my travel partner sent an email saying, we'd like to visit the site. No, Dr. Ionescu is going to come, blah, blah. She's on this mapping project. Nobody answers, as nobody tends to answer us anyway. So the morning that we were supposed to go, I said, well, let's just go, because I've been dreaming about this site since I wrote my PhD, because of the magic and the ritual that happens here. And she goes, okay, but we're going to go, but no one's replied. So don't be disappointed if the gates are locked. And when we get up there, Derek,
This guy.
this guy is there. Okay. I've made a little video, which you can play whenever, although there's talking here, but of him being there. So when we saw him, we were like, oh my God, what are you doing here? We were so excited. So he opened up the space for us and we got to walk around. Okay. Lots of things happen at this site. This is a mystery cult site, which means that there's a lot of life and death ritual that happens here. These goddesses are all chthonic goddesses, which means they're goddesses that go into the underworld and come back up. That's Demeter, Despina, and Artemis. Artemis here is in the role of guardian, the role of rebirth, and her role as hunter. So this is a very complicated role. Okay. The most famous of rituals that happen here. I can't even get out. It breaks my heart. You see how there's these steps here that look like on the side that look like you could sit there and watch.
Yes.
Right? It looks a bit like a. So people used to sit and watch the ritual take place. In this ritual, the sacrifices offered were dismembered piece by piece. Okay. So on the altar, you're supposed to kill you slash the throat of an offering, right? And then you bleed it out, usually into something else. And then you can prepare it to eat. On this altar, the priests and priestesses dismembered the animals piece by piece. So they took apart. Yeah, they took them apart. So the question then, of course, is why? Why would they do that? This is quite gruesome. You can just imagine what that's like. But there is a mystery cult here that we don't know that much about that has to do with the destruction of the living body and the reconstruction and rebirth of life.
Makes me think of Sparagmos, the dismemberment in Dionysus ritual with the Maenads. Something deep and archaic about, something dark and just kind of.
And when they watched these rituals, they wore animal masks. So they arrived in the dark at the temple with Artemis leading, because she's the torchbearer here. She's Phosphorus. All of the members, the mystery initiates and the members, wore animal masks and then watched this ritual take place. And then afterwards, something must have happened, which we don't have records of, in which the rebirth ritual or the salvation ritual would happen as well. But this is the only site that we know of where there is a yearly ritual in which all of the offerings that are brought up to the altar one by one are dismembered.
Wow. Did they eat it after?
We don't know. They didn't burn it, so it's not like Laphria.
That's why I thought Sparagmos, because if they didn't burn it, that is the raw consumption of meat. And that is like what the Dionysian Maenads and some of the stories were supposedly doing.
Yeah.
So wild. I mean, and by the way, we have that echo in the Eucharist with eat my flesh, drink my blood. And this like break, when you do this, remember my body is broken. You're tearing the body, body members of Jesus apart. And so,
right. So my question was always, as a graduate student, why do they have these massive statues on this mountain? Because this mountain is in the middle of nowhere. Okay. You're on a road. I mean, you're going on serpentine roads and you're in the middle of nowhere. There's no town nearby. I mean, it's further down, right? There's nothing nearby. And they have these colossal statues, of course, which either they built on site or certainly they had to bring up all the stone. And so I was thinking, well, why would you do that? Like, and so the theory is, because again, a lot of it is mystery cult, is that whatever happened here was so deeply important, and that this mystery cult was so devoted to this salvation ritual that included this dismemberment, unlike anywhere else. And of course, Artemis here plays front and center, because while Despina and Demeter sit down, she is the one that is, she has the snakes in her hand, which are immortality. She has the light, which is the torch, and still in her hunter mode, because she's also in charge of animals. So she's got this complex, brutal job here, as partnership with these two chthonic goddesses, which are also sometimes seen as underworld goddesses. So again, a very dark aspect that I don't think people talk about or think about when they think about Artemis.
Does she play the mediator kind of role? Because you do have the Titan on the right, which is protector, so to speak. But I know that these are underworld goddesses, chthonic goddesses. But as far as her, do you think she plays the role between this world and the afterlife?
So that's what her holding the snakes would suggest, because she very rarely holds snakes. In fact, this is one of the few times I've ever seen a statue, in which she's holding snakes. She's holding torches, as we've talked about before. That's pretty regular. So here, the theory is that she is some kind of an intermediator between life and death. And she's got a long history of being a death dealer. So, for example, Penelope in the Odyssey, when she's had enough of the suitors, at some point she says, "Oh God, if only Artemis would grant me her peaceful death," because she was sometimes famous for shooting an arrow into you and giving you a good death, and some people would pray to her for that. So sometimes we refer to her as a death dealer. And so she is this liminal goddess. She's this transitional goddess. She's always in between spaces, right? So it makes perfect sense that it is her that is here mediating this ritual between the life that's alive, right? The living organisms, the living organic life, and then the death, but also that she's watching over the process of the ritual, which is the dismemberment process. Which is kind of creepy in a way, because it's like she's protecting the animals while they're being put through this torturous thing. I mean, right?
And so they're alive. Are they alive while they're dismembering it?
Yes.
You said that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the crazy part. I had someone go, but the only way to do it is in the chat. They were making the point that, in order to eat them, you have to dismember them. But that's not the point. The point is they're still alive. They're like doing it while they're alive. So they're suffering. Right. This has got to be a deeply suffering motif. Right. It's not even just a motif, it's life, but they want to almost inflict the worst amount of suffering through this traumatic mystery yearly practice, it seems.
Yes. So this is not a celebration. This is a deeply dark ritual, I would say. I mean, we don't know exactly, because no one's quite written. We don't have a member eyewitness, but there's lots of dark rituals in which ancient peoples would throw themselves in that trauma of experience in order to, reach some type of understanding of the pain and survival through life, right? But I mean, it's gruesome. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be gruesome, though.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they have kind of like a small stadium, as you can see here, where they would sit and absorb the ritual being observe the ritual being performed.
Wild. That is wild.
Friday afternoon. Okay.
I know, right?
Okay, let's do a little lighter. A little lighter. I think my last couple of slides are a little lighter. This is Artemis Ephesus. So, okay, the Temple of Apollo Ephesus is widely known. Also on top of a mountain, or almost at the top of a mountain, among mountains. It's big. It's one of the largest temples to Apollo in Greece. Everybody goes to visit it. The site is great, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Little known fact, though by now you're probably not surprised, that there was an Artemis temple there before the Apollo temple. But the Artemis temple is about a half an hour hike to the peak of the mountain. So this place is locked off as well. So when I arrived there, there was the guards, the lady guards that were there. And I said, I'd like to see the temple of Artemis up top, which of course they were already shocked. Like, what are you even talking about? How do you even know they're there? But okay. And then they said to me, it's just rocks when you get there. I said, yeah, I know. And they're like, there's snakes everywhere. Yes. And scorpions. Yes. And, so they were trying their very best to understand why I would decide to go climb this mountain to see a pile of rocks. Okay. But they gave me the keys because sometimes the PhD after my names helps with that a lot. Right. And so they're like, okay, there you go. Have keys, get water, blah, blah, blah. I made it to the top of this mountain in about 45 minutes. There's no sign, but like, I don't know how to explain what happens when you climb. You kind of get an idea of where it is. So I have a map in mind and I have an idea of where it is. So I climbed up to, and I finally found it. I thought I found it a couple of times before because when it's a pile of rocks, it's hard to sometimes notice it. But there's certain aspects. So when I got to here, I realized, oh, here's the rectangular spaces and etc. So there's a temple of Artemis and then there's a little temple of Aphrodite beside her as well, which was really great. I got to film it, blah, blah, blah. And this place was in use before the Temple of Apollo Ephesus. And then eventually, once the Temple of Apollo Ephesus became so popular, what they did is they moved this little temple down below. So there is a small temple to Artemis on the lower floor where Apollo was. But when I came down the mountain, Derek, I took a wrong turn. So they had said to me, oh, the path up there might be marked with these red marks. And of course, I climbed up there and I saw no red marks. I saw nothing. And so I thought, okay, maybe I went the wrong way. Maybe what I should do is go down this other way, which you should never do when you're climbing a mountain, but go down this other way and see if I can find the path that they were talking about. And I lost about 6 hours. I ended up 2 mountains over.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. This is in the middle of June last year. Ran out of water. Thank God my phone was working and my GPS locator was working. So my friend who was sitting in the car was like, what the hell's going on? You said this is 45 minutes. And I had texted her that I found the temple and I'm coming back down. And so she's usually okay. She usually gives me some time because I take my time, and then I said to her, I'm 2 mountains over. And I sent her where I was. And she was like, holy shit. Because it's not like they come to rescue you.
Right.
I mean, who's coming? The ladies that are at the front desk, like they're not coming for you. Greece doesn't have like a rescue, thing for, the way we do, for example, in North America for hikers. They don't have like park rangers with trucks and things like that. I mean, maybe if you're super wealthy, you might get a chopper, but where's the chopper going to come? We're in this bush. So I had to make some hard decisions and, that's a longer story, but I made it back just before I was completely dehydrated.
You had to dismember a few animals to have the gods help you. I'm just kidding.
There were no animals, not even water, nothing. It was, it was the most silliest mistake as a hiker and as someone out in the heat, the most silliest mistake. But I had prepared for 45 minutes of climbing up and climbing back down, not 6 hours, but anyways, I made it back and I found the temple. So these things are great.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Is there more or no?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I wanted to leave it on Artemis of Ephesus, which we can talk about later because this is a whole other thing. But I just wanted to mention that this is also Artemis. People sometimes say that the Greek Artemis and the Ephesian Artemis are different. They're not. They're the same goddess. And I think I talked to you about the fact that I'm just finishing up the book on Artemis of Ephesus. Should be done, hopefully, and submitted to a publisher this week. But often they're portrayed as 2 different kind of Artemises, and they're not. They're the same Artemis. It's just that this one has a much broader mystical adaptation. And in fact, it's this one, more or less, that becomes later the Virgin Mary.
And we're going to have to get into that.
We'll have to get into that. Although, exactly, that's another long. And then that's just my book and things.
You can scan the QR code.
Yes.
I got the link pinned at the top of the chat. It's in the description. And then you can follow her as well, correct? Is this your Instagram at Artemis?
Yeah, so that's all everywhere, TikTok, everywhere is at Artemis Expert. So
okay.
Yeah.
Go follow her, get her book. And honestly, this is there's so much we could get into with Artemis. I really appreciate you breaking that down. There's a lot. I didn't realize how much there was that we could get into pertaining to Artemis. There's a lot I imagine that we've lost to understanding about this goddess. So one of the things that came to mind was the fact that she appears in a myth where there's the sacrifice we talked about with Agamemnon and the idea of virginity, but also childbirth, right?
Yes.
And I'm thinking to myself, what's the significance of her relationship in myth, in worship, pertaining to that? Like, is there any evidence we have from classes? Like, do classicists have an assumption here that makes a lot of sense?
So the question I think that comes up a lot, which is what you're saying, is how does a virgin goddess become the goddess of childbirth since she has no children?
Right.
And so I think that's okay. To me, that feels like a simple question. Okay, a simple answer. Sorry, because we also see later a virgin birth of the Virgin Mary. And so virgins can clearly be mothers. But Artemis herself is not actually a mother. Okay, so the idea of virginity, number one, is in the Greek stories and in the Greek mythology is not about a hymen, right? So a virgin goddess is a goddess that's never married. Okay, so there's not so much about virginity or sexual contact as much as it is just never married. The fact that she helps in birthing her brother is one of the connections that is later made to say, well, she helps in childbirth with her brother, therefore she helps in childbirth with other children. But the truth is that that helping in childbirth for women, certainly women helping other women in childbirth, is a story as old as time. I mean, that's who's helping in childbirth since the beginning of our Homo sapiens sapien existence and before, right?
Right.
Doctors or male doctors come in, 200 years ago or so, right? So that's a whole other story. So it's not that unusual for a goddess to not have her own children, but help in the protection and bringing into the world of children. And the fact that she's a virgin is more about the fact that she never marries. So her attention, her energy is never divided. Because when you're in a relationship, whatever relationship it is, you are compromised. You are, working together. You are in partnership. Artemis is in none of that. She's never, and she is always her own sovereign being.
And there's no distractions either.
No distractions. No commitments.
Right. Got it.
She has an entourage of women that she protects. And she has friends, like she has certain favorites that are heroes and certain favorites that are other women. So she's got lots of these kinds of side relationships, but nothing in the sense of a partnership or a commitment. And her main protection or her main focus is youth. So human youth, fawns, any kind of baby animals, any kind of sort of any animal that needs protection, the wilderness that needs protection. She has forests that are her favorites. She has groves that are her favorites. She has also, there's an environmental aspect to her, although the Greeks wouldn't have thought it that way. But, there are spaces of protection, you don't, try to ruin her rivers or you try to cut down her forest, let's say, without her permission or her blessing. So her focus is really all of that rather than any kind of partnership. And women very much flock to her. Of course, men flock to her as well, because the hunter aspect of her, they really like. There's something about her, again, that's really fearsome, because all the temples that you've seen that are built to her are built by men and funded by men who felt called to honor her in some way. And then oftentimes it is women that actually go there and perform all of these tasks. Because again, in the ancient world, gender roles, we tend to think of them as binary because the Greeks come up with binarism, but actually in everyday local lore, gender roles were a lot more overlapped. That is, for example, there are many festivals that are women only, that would be about fertility, procreation, and women stuff. Okay. Men sponsored that. They paid for that. They sponsored that. They pushed for that. They wanted that. They celebrated that women had that space, because that fertility, that celebration, those festivals done right would have profited the entire family, the entire village. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
So even though they're living in patriarchy, and we talk about this all the time, the relationships among the humans within the village are very different than perhaps we have been thinking about them. You know, I think in some ways we've been misled to think of a division, when actually what we're seeing on the ground is that there was less division than we think, that everyone really worked together really well for the benefit of the entire tribe and the entire community.
The other thing about Artemis that you kept highlighting is this terror, this fear, this terror, this kind of like, she's not shy to like just go to the most intense. In fact, it almost seems like she wants the most, like, bring it. It's like the famous last scene, Mel Gibson, freedom, and they're like doing the most torturous thing to the guy. Like, she's asking for the most ass-kicking scene from a movie that we watch and got to turn our head. Like, what is with that? And does she have any overlap with Satyr's Pan, this idea of terror and fear?
Yeah. Okay. So the short answer to that is yes. So of course, her and Dionysus are buddies. They're best friends. So you can see a lot of that overlap. Pan, of course, is prancing around in the forest, right? Like he's pretty chill. And so he would have been under her or alongside some of her entourage sometimes. I don't think that he's ever really depicted with her that I've seen in the statues, but he would have been no stranger to the wilderness. Artemis, so this is the mystery of this goddess, right? With Actaeon, for example, I think we talked about Actaeon a couple of days ago. So he's a hunter, right? He worships Artemis. He's out with his buddies hunting and all the dogs and blah, blah, blah. And she's taking a bath in the forest, and he sneaks up on her and he sees her taking a bath, which, I mean, everyone knows you shouldn't do. You don't just look at the gods. Come on, dude. But whatever. So he does. And he's a prince too, like he's, elite. And she turns around and she sees him. And within seconds, she magically turns him into a deer. The very thing that him and his buddies are out hunting.
Oh,
so he starts to scream in a deer voice. He's a deer. Okay. Right. So now imagine like a Disney change here where he's a deer now. Right. He starts to scream, and his own dogs are alerted. So his dogs attack him. And speaking of dismemberment, start to take him apart. And his buddies find the dogs. Of course, they've been calling for him. Actaeon, where are you? And then they circle the dogs and watch as the dogs tear him apart, encouraging the dogs to take down this deer because they think it's a deer, right?
Right.
So this is epic Artemis punishment. Epic Artemis punishment. She kills lots of people, but this is what I call like swift retributive justice. She doesn't ask for consent. I mean, she doesn't ask for permission. She doesn't care. She's like, you dared to spy on me without my consent. Ooh, now I'm going to kill you in the most painful and embarrassing way possible. And so this would have been one of those warning stories that hunters were told, in the sense that hunters often left offerings to her in the woods, whether it was their own, if they had a successful hunt, they would leave the bow and arrow, or they would leave parts of animals, or they would leave whatever. So there is this sense of being a little afraid of her. We don't think about that. And in fact, when I sometimes go to goddess circles, I go to lots of goddess circles and I talk a lot about the goddess. One of the things that I bring up about Artemis is that she has an aspect that is cruel that is bloodthirsty, that is, I don't know, vengeful, that is, that sometimes within goddess circles, people don't feel as comfortable discussing, right? It's easy to focus on, especially when we think about goddesses, on the softness and the love and sometimes the sex or the mothering or whatever, these aspects that we have now associated with femininity. But Artemis, who is a very feminine goddess, she has no real relationships with men. She has lots of relationships with women. She is not nice and not, but you would want someone like that protection, right? Like as a mother, if I was to call on someone to protect my kid, right, it would be her. Of course it would be her, because I know she gets the job done, right?
There's a weird irony though, that like she's the protector of fawns, of children, of little ones, of birth, of this and that. Yet she's also performing the most intense acts of violence and things like that in the very thing that she's the most protective of. It's kind of wild. She's the controller of life and death in the area.
Yes. So it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, if you're living in a hunter culture as a man or a woman, right? Especially as a woman, actually, if you have a child or children to protect, the first thing you have to do is kill things. You have to kill things to eat. You have to kill things to protect your family, right? So to me, it's the most feminine thing you can do is to protect your children. Would I kill somebody to protect my son? Hell yeah.
Same here.
Right? Like, I mean, and when I gave birth to my daughter, it was the first time I realized I could kill somebody for her and I would feel no way about it. Like, so I can understand that in her, and I can understand why people, both men and women, are drawn to that strength, because they see that, they almost see that kind of raw wildness in ourselves. Like we see that in our humanity. It's like, there is a part of me that I know that should probably be a little more gentle, but could go really, really hard if you hurt what's mine, or if I have to feed what's mine. And I think Artemis, I mean, I can't speak for the ancients, but it seems to me that they have built so many temples to her. Both, I mean, there's lots of fun temples to her where there's lots of celebrations and drinking and partying, and like Artemis of the marshes and Artemis of the rivers and Artemis. So there's lots of other layers of her that is a little gentler. Right. It's not always like kill, kill, kill. But I think it's important that we see how she encompasses all of what it means to be human in a way, right? I mean, she's a divine being, like, you know what I mean? It's a weird thing, like, but she embodies all the aspects of our existence, even the ones that we're not very comfortable with or don't like.
Yeah. I think that she's awesome. I love it. Artemis is something else. I'm telling you. Okay. So I have many other questions I want to get into, but I think we might need to either go to super chats and hear what people's questions are, or we do a round 2 at some point and we can get into some of these examples and go deeper.
Yes. So we could do all.
Okay.
Derek, I could talk about Artemis forever and we've just scratched the surface. So yeah.
I know, but I think it's good that we do these in sessions and reconnect and things like that. So, okay. 1,250 people watching. I hope you'll like the video right now. Press 1 in the chat right now if you don't want Artemis to be on you don't want to be on Artemis's bad side. Right now, press 1 if this is someone you want on your team, okay? And I want to see a lot of 1s in the chat right now, or I'm calling Artemis right now, okay? First super chat, Mason Verger. Thank you so much for the super chat. Big fan of Dr. How do I pronounce it again? Ionescu. Yeah. I almost said Ionescu, but Ionescu. Is that a Greek? It's
Romanian.
Romanian. Okay. So Ionescu, thank you so much for correcting me here. Has she read the theories of religious scholar Riley Martin? He contended that Artemis was based on mythologies that derived from ancient aliens visiting Earth in prehistory?
I have not.
Riley Martin.
I have not read Riley Martin. Yeah, so I don't know about this theory about Artemis. So I can see how some of those theories are developed because, like I said, her name is not Greek. You know, there's great debates about her name. There isn't really an initial, you know, we arrived with Artemis, we invented her. So there's still a lot of mystery to her roots. But I haven't read Riley Martin's work. No.
I haven't either. I just looked it up on Wikipedia, and it looks like an author that's written on that. Now we got people. Don't play with Artemis with a 2. Don't put no 5s. You just heard what Artemis will do if you catch her showering in the woods. I mean, you know, watch out. Watch out. Okay. Yes. Gnostic informant in the house. My bro is gonna want to interview you soon. Yes. Def have to get you back on soon. Question: what is Artemis link to childbirth?
Right. Hi Neil, how's it going? Yeah. So I think her mythological link is the fact that she helps Apollo be born, and I think that's how they explain it. But I have no doubt that her connection to childbirth is much earlier, before Apollo shows up on the scene. Because we haven't really talked about parthenogenesis, right? So parthenogenesis is this theory. I mean, it's a scientific, I guess, theory as well, because some amoebas can do Anyway, it's this idea that a feminine organism can reproduce, a female organism can reproduce on its own without the help of a male organism. And goddesses, you know, even pre-Neolithic goddesses and earlier goddesses were thought to be parthenogenetic, which meant like Gaia, for example. Gaia births her consort. And there's lots of stories of goddesses who birth their consort, like Gaia, for example, birthed something out of nothing. In the beginning, there was nothing but Gaia. And then she creates the world, and she creates Uranus. And then with Uranus, she creates, you know, all of these different generations until Rhea, she creates the Titans and blah, blah, blah. So the idea that goddesses could birth without any help from a masculine companion is archaic and predates the Greeks. So it's possible that Artemis herself may have been a parthenogenetic goddess. But we don't have any records that she actually has a child. There are some stories in which she is given a child. There's a later story in the Wiccan tradition and the Dianic Wiccan tradition. There's a later story that she has a daughter. And in the Orphic tradition, there's a story that she has a child. But these are side quest stories. So they are more in mystery religions and mystery cults than sort of traditional lore of her.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Baldolino, forgive me if I butchered your name. Is the Ephesian Artemis based on a different deity? You brought that up. And are those really breasts on the statues? Seems a bit excessive. Great stream. Thanks to both.
Hi, Baldolino. So Artemis, the Ephesian Artemis is the same Artemis as the Greek Artemis, but how do I say this in short? But she is here in Turkey, in Ephesus. She grows and embodies other aspects of, for example, Kybele or Kubaba or earlier Anatolian divinities. But she's not a different deity. She is Artemis, the huntress, the protector. As you see, all these layers of Artemis in Greece would have translated really well in Turkey as well. It's just that when we think about the Greek Artemis, we just think of her as a hunter, but obviously she plays the role of the guardian, the role of savior, the role of Phosphorus, the role of all of those things. So it is the same goddess. But in Turkey also, she has this stand erect body, as Derek has just shown on the screen, which is very similar to Artemis or Thea of the Spartans. And those are not breasts, no. Number one, we know they're not breasts because even though these are all Roman replicas, we don't have any of the originals, none of them have nipples. And as you can see, this is the statue in Napoli. You can see the face and hand and feet are made of dark stone or black stone, which is usually referred to as cosmic stone. And the rest of the dress is made of this sort of what has become now beige marble. So In my book, I talk about this a lot, but one of my biggest thing is that those are either queen bee eggs, because there's a large and a long bee tradition associated with Artemis of Ephesus, or they're cosmic sacs. So there are two other statues, but really large cosmic sacs. There are two other statues that are really fascinating that have cosmic sacs on them. One is a Roman statue of Cybele, where she has like regular breasts, and then on her stomach, she has a triangle of cosmic sacs. And the other one is a statue of Zeus Labrandos, where obviously he's a male. So he's standing up and he has a triangle of these protrusions on his body as well. And these we know for sure are cosmic sacs, which means that cosmic sacs mean that they carry magic, really. So it could be anything from like a sack of curses to a sack of healing to they're referred to as cosmic sacs because they carry some kind of mysterious medicine in them. Or they could be bee eggs, queen bee eggs. If you look at queen bee eggs, biologically speaking, if you just look at a picture of queen bee eggs, you will see that they look identical to these protrusions. And, the ancients are not shy. If they were breasts, they would have put nipples on them. I know later on the Italians like to put nipples on them because there's lots of fountains with this Artemis of Ephesus with water coming out of her boobs. And the Renaissance artists and other artists put boobs on her. But the original pieces that we have, the earliest pieces that we have about 5, 6 of them. The Vatican has 1, Ephesus has 2, Napoli has 1. So we have a bunch, but none of them have nipples on them. So there's no historical documentation of her ever being called many-breasted or having breasts. None. Pausanias doesn't say it. Nobody. And again, some of those guys would have left some imprint if those were breasts, but
I would think some guys would,
somebody would have said something, but they didn't, because
especially a guy though. I mean, come on. Thank you so much for the super chat, Ida, and for being a member of MythVision. We really, 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 really appreciate it. No joke. I was trying to say really as many times as we saw cosmic sacs on that statue, but look, there's a lot of them. She changes over time like most gods. Is it possible that real women played significant roles that have become associated with her?
Oh, that's a good one, Ida. There are some names to Artemis. So I have this long list of names for her. There are, I'm trying to think. For example, in Epidavros, there is a temple to Artemis Claudia, for example. And there's very little known about this temple. But what we think is that it was once maybe an Artemis temple, and then there was a woman named Claudia within the area that was either elite or well honored or something, and that her name becomes associated with Artemis at this temple. And then eventually by the Roman period, this temple becomes Artemis Claudia. So I would say yes, I think that there would have been at least some women that become associated with her. But I am not yet, other than a couple of examples like that, I don't have all the examples yet.
I think Ida was saying, I meant, were real women at the time possible with significant roles connected to her and did something in reality that might have helped change her story, since her story changes over time? If I understand you, Ida, I just want to make sure I get this. Were there real historical events by real women, I imagine, that were doing something that influenced the myth and story of Artemis?
Well, Ida, unfortunately, we don't have the writings of women, though we know they wrote. So it's very hard to have evidence of that. I would say that that's a likely possibility, but we don't have any stories of women that are not written by men. Right. In fact, we just started to talk about Ephesia, who's the teacher of Socrates. We just started to make her name public.
Wow.
Right. I mean, Socrates has a female mentor. Anyways, so we know they wrote, we know that, but so much was destroyed. So we don't have any stories like that. So what I'm saying is I don't have any evidence that could support that, but it wouldn't surprise me if women's
Right.
lives and experience, of course, influence her worship and even her storylines.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. Dr. Carla, how would goddess Artemis handle the current conflict between Israel and Persia? Also, did Artemis remain a virgin forever?
Ah, Solera. How does Artemis handle conflict? I think this is a very good question for which my answer is a bit vague, only because Artemis does get into battle every now and then. She's in the Gigantomachy. There's a couple of battles that they all are in as Olympians, but we don't see her very much in a battle. Okay, so battle-wise, we don't see her in it. As far as like a negotiator, for example, hard to say if she plays a role of a negotiator between two conflicting tribes. I'm trying to think of an example. She usually gets involved when either innocents are killed, like the children that were killed for Artemis of Ephesus. So there's an injustice that happens, and she usually exacts some or demands something in exchange when there's an injustice that happened. But of course, here we'd have to say, what does she think is an injustice and how is it measured? But as the protector of children, I would say that whenever children are harmed, Artemis would exact some type of consequence. I think that's the best I can do as far as what she would do. And did Artemis remain a virgin forever? Yes, absolutely, 100%. And by virgin, I mean she never married. There are side legends that she had lots of affairs with the women in her entourage. Callisto is a great example. In fact, Callisto apparently and Artemis had a relationship in such so well known that in order for Zeus to seduce Callisto, he turns himself into Artemis.
Oh, sneaky man.
Of course, he then impregnates Callisto, and we're told that when Artemis finds out, she's so upset that she turns Callisto into a bear as punishment, which is a bit unfair. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat Artemis for you all, even though she is important to me, but I want to be as honest as possible. Sometimes she could be quite unfair and cruel. In the case,
what was she supposed to do? I mean, you're dealing with Zeus, right? So like,
and Zeus as Artemis,
right?
So she didn't know,
right?
So I do think that that is unfair and unjust. A part of me hopes that that's a later story or development, but it's at least Roman, so it's not that late. So,
wow.
Part of me wants to excuse the behavior, but I can't.
You're an apologist for Artemis. But at least you're honest, okay? At least you're being honest. History Valley, this is my buddy Jacob Berman. You would absolutely, I think you've been on his channel before.
Yes.
Yeah. We got to have you come back. Thank you for the super chat, my friend.
Yes.
Please definitely connect with him. I think he sent you an email. But definitely would look forward to that live stream.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look for that. Yes, thank you. Hi, Jacob. Yeah.
Thank you, Jacob. Love you, brother. JC in the house. Oh, here's a head scratcher. I can't even begin to know what some of this means. JC, just giving you fair warning, he's big into like etymological root words and how they might relate cross-cultural and cross languages.
Yes.
Can you make out anything here? I see bear.
Yes. So lots of interpretations. Thank you, JC. Lots of interpretations of her name come or are thought to come from the root of bear. And she is associated with bears. Certainly at Brauron, she's associated with bears. And then that actually, if we follow that thread, that ties us into the she-bear culture, the mother bear culture. That actually pulls us up into the Balkans, which is where I come from, Eastern Europe, that has a very strong bear culture as well. Lots of stories in what they call Old Europe or Balkan Europe or Eastern Europe, if we go out further, of bear culture. So there's a long theory that she may have come down to the Mediterranean as a bear goddess or associated with bears from, let's say, northern areas or northern Europe. And so, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all that that her name can be associated with bears. And the arcto, the arct in the Artemis, is also, that's right, JC. So there's also, so there's this long tradition that she may have come from bears, which I would love. I mean, so it's hard to prove because, like I said, we don't have any official evidence of when she was first called that somewhere else. Part of my expedition and my mapping project will take me up into the Balkans, though that will be down the road, because there are a lot of hunter goddesses up there, and bear goddesses up there, and perhaps at that point there will be a much more clear connection. But again, the problem for me, especially as an academic or even just documenting, is that a lot of those cultures are more visually shaped, like they have an oral narrative and a visual narrative. They have artifacts, not as much written narrative that we can find. So then when you're making an argument, right, I will say it if I come across enough bear connections. I mean, I will say it, but you got to find these things, this material culture, before you can really say, oh yes, this is what it is.
And then JC says, sounds like ritual symbolizing a bear's dismembering of animals. Imagine coming across a dismembered mammal on the mountain.
Yes, exactly. Actually, that's a really good point, JC, that how bears dismember their prey.
Very cruel. Like, I mean, that's why I'm like, okay, what's going on here? You know, maybe there is something to this bear connection.
Yeah, no, for sure. And her association with bears is very well documented. So that connection is very interesting, JC. Indeed. Yeah, I like it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Solera Knight's back again. Thank you so much for the super. Is Cupid a baby Artemis?
Is Cupid a baby Artemis? That's so cute. Cupid is a baby Eros, right? The kid of Aphrodite and Ares. And a troublemaker, but not a baby Artemis. In fact, I can't think of any images in which Artemis is small. There is one in one museum in this kind of corner. There is a small statue of Artemis that to me looks like a little girl, although it's only her torso. But that's Artemis Sotira or Artemis the Savior. So it doesn't really make sense. That might be one of those badly labeled pieces. But I've never seen her as a baby depicted so far in any of the artifacts, but Cupid is definitely Eros.
Thank you. The mother frickin' Wendyberg. Thank you so much for being a member. Isn't that an awesome name? This is so fascinating. Thank you for your knowledge, she says.
I love it.
And then, thank you again, Wendy. Could Artemis have gone by a different name originally?
Well, the mother frickin' Wendyberg. I love that name too. So there are some Bronze Age connections. So her earliest form may have been Patnia Theron. I don't know if you've heard of that, the mistress of animals. Now that is, so there's lots of argument. Is that really Artemis? Is it not? Derek, we can have a whole thing on the Bronze Age and the Minoans, because so there's a lot of evidence to show that might have been an early form of Artemis. Then in Crete, she was also known as Britomartis, which is the honey maiden, or Dictina, which is she of the nets. So in Crete, there's also some predecessors to Artemis before she becomes Artemis.
Gotcha.
So there's a bunch of different goddesses that predate her that eventually she takes on either the characteristics of or the responsibilities of. But yeah, we'd have to trace that. That would take a little while.
Yeah, and these are things we can do too, by the way. So like, we'll obviously give you time to prepare and get a few notes together too, because there's a lot of information here.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Jason Kakulo, thank you for the super chat. If Artemis has pre-Hellenistic or Hellenic origin, is she an Indo-European huntress or Mother Earth god?
Yes. Jason, the answer to that is yes. I think if you go into any of the gods and goddesses that we have any information about that are, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000, whatever we can find going back. And a lot of that is more artifact now and then written data. But yes, there's lots of arguments that Artemis is one of the early. So there's something about humankind that has associated this Mother Earth association or the hunting or the wild goddess with eventually with Artemis. So that there's something about us that had this belief in these two aspects of the goddess, and then eventually as the Greeks started to, as we started telling maybe more elaborate stories about the gods, and we start giving them names and personalities that are more sort of characterized, we see Artemis. But yes, I would say absolutely she has this early origin.
Thank you, Jason. JC's back again. See hard to scratch more than Artemis's surface. I don't know. I don't even know what language that is. Did you freeze? Did we lose her? Am I lost? Ladies and gentlemen in the chat, press 1 if I'm coming through, and if our academic isn't. Carla, did we lose you? Press 1. Let me know. She's in deep thought about it. Oh, there you are.
What happened?
You froze. You were like this.
Oh my god! Wait, no, you froze. Oh
No,
my god, you're freaking me out.
I did that on purpose. Sorry, did you say something about this?
I just said I have to look up on that character. I'm not familiar with it. Yeah.
JC over here blowing brains. And then look, Neil says she's in deep thought about this question. Everybody else is saying it too. They're all pressing 1. So yeah. Okay. I was checking. I was like, hold up, what's going on? GD, thank you for the super chat. Parallels with a knot.
Yes.
Common origin story.
Yes. Parallels with a knot. So there is some work that says that she comes out of that some of her qualities, later her Greek qualities, her Olympian qualities, come out of earlier Mesopotamian culture. So, anything from the Sumerians and then the Akkadians and the Babylonians. And so you can trace some of those characteristics. And I think that would be really fun to do. I'm not sure there's a direct line, but if we were trying to create that line, we could probably find it. So it's interesting because she seems to have all of these geographical origins, and I think again that has to do with her hunter and wild or wilderness aspects, because so many cultures on this planet have an early, of course, Mother Earth goddess, right? And so, I mean,
you're going to find characteristics that are going to overlap, even if they did not have a genealogical borrowing, just inherent through. Jung might try to do it in a psychological sense, and there might be something to that.
Yeah.
But just even the pragmatic, like every human's looking up at the skies, they see the same stars, or just how the world works. We all are experiencing typically the natural world the same way. In some uniform way. So you're going to come to similar overlaps and conclusions without necessarily one borrowing from the other. But I do think of a knot's like bloodthirsty.
Yeah.
She's pretty feisty. So, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we can get it even in Egyptian mythology, there's Neith, there's, and we haven't even gone to the Amazons, right? I mean, the Amazons eventually end up settling the area that then now is where Artemis of Ephesus was worshipped. So there is a lot of overlap of symbology, and there's a lot of overlap of these metaphors that seem to be in our, as Jung would say, in our collective unconscious, that we seem to tell stories about similar divinities.
Interesting.
Until, of course, later when we all come all into one.
Right. The Greek way of doing things, Osiris, that's Dionysus, that's Dusaris, that's Ion, that's yeah. Gnostic informant in the house again, my brother. Thank you so much. Thoughts on Diodorus saying the Sarmatians of
Yes.
Crimea sacrificed lost Black Sea sailors to
Yes.
Artemis
Yes.
Tauropolis.
Artemis Tauropolis. Yes. Yes. And Neil, I was at that temple site. That is another locked temple site. And it's still right on the beach. Absolutely. Yes. So Crimea is where Iphigenia is another one of the stories where Iphigenia eventually ended up, and where Orestes was, and they that's where Artemis Tauropolis was being worshipped. And there's lots of bloody sacrifices for Artemis Tauropolis. I mean, bulls, of course, is one of the bigger ones, because that's why she's called Toro and Tauropolis and Taurine. But yes, even human sacrifices. She is one of the last goddesses or the last divinities to have human sacrifices. Like over time, people stopped sacrificing humans to many of the gods. Initially, almost all the gods had human sacrifices. But she's one of the last ones. And Artemis Tauropolis, yes, they would have definitely sacrificed.
Can you tell us briefly what this story is? I'm not familiar with this story.
So Artemis Tauropolis is another incarnation or embodiment of Artemis. But here in this area in Crimea, she is said to have been, again, one of these bloodthirsty goddesses. And the Crimeans used to have these rituals where they would sacrifice hundreds of bulls, for example, for her. And they would throw the blood of bulls on her cult statue. And so there was this kind of bloodiness to Artemis Tauropolis. Eventually, Iphigenia, we're told, brings her down to Brauron, and the bloodthirstiness kind of stops. But for her here, Artemis Tauropolis, we also are told that humans were sacrificed for her, and that she demanded human sacrifice. And so the Greeks sometimes say, like the ancient Greeks will sometimes say, well, the Crimeans were not really officially Greek. They were kind of barbarians. And then eventually they brought, and barbarians for Greece is everybody that's outside of their geography, right? And then eventually when they brought Artemis Tauropolis down to Brauron, they stopped this barbarian sacrifice. But while she's up in Crimea, where she's being worshipped up there, there are stories of human sacrifice for her.
I'm thinking, why wouldn't that be the case if Agamemnon's story, right? Like with this whole idea, even though she saves, Iphigenia, like still, that biblical as well. Like,
I mean, so, but okay, in the case, like Neil says, in the case of Black Sea sailors, that would have been involuntary, right? But there are lots of stories of voluntary human sacrifice for the gods. These are more, Bronze Age stories, but there are lots of stories in which the gods demand human sacrifice, and that the members, the sacrifices themselves, are volunteering to be sacrificed. I mean, that was a time in our history when,
I'm thinking of the show Vikings, where they did like every 9 years, they have these 9, different animals, and then humans, of course. Wild. The final super chat we have from the mother frickin' Wendyberg. Thank you for the super chat. There is also Philadeus, Celtic goddess of the hunt. Also, the bear was a sacred animal of the Celts.
Yes, 100%. Yes. The Celts had a lot more bears than the Greeks, although the Greeks had more bears then than they do now. But yes, there are a great deal of goddesses of the hunt that are not particularly called Artemis, obviously, in different parts of Europe, but have almost identical characteristics. So again, this is one of the theories of why there's a belief that maybe she came down from Northern Europe. The tradition came down, but it's hard to know, because in the Mediterranean as well, there's lots of hunting that was going on. And in the Middle East, there's lots of hunting that was going on. And so there's lots of hunting lore and hunter lore that seems like it could easily fit Artemis. And perhaps this is why she resonates with people so much, also in the ancient world and today. Because in some ways, she seems like a relatable divinity. There's something tangible about her, right? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But she feels like someone that could be your sister. Exactly. Or that could be your friend. I mean, I had grown up for so long with this idea of submission to a god, right? Because you grow up in Christianity, it's very submissive. And in discovering more and more about Artemis, you're learning about kind of collaboration with a god, and you start to think about how the ancients would have seen themselves not equal to a god, but collaborating with them like a mentor, so that if I offer something to the god for this hunt, that the god would come on the hunt with me.
Right.
There's a right, like there's a I don't know. I'm using the word collaboration, but there's more of that kind of a relationship, and so it seems like she was quite relatable to many people in the ancient world, and it seems like she's returning, which
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of rediscovering.
yeah,
We've been so I'm going to use the word indoctrinated by Plato,
yeah,
and the philosophies that Christianity kind of has
yeah,
sent out there, that like I'm actually fascinated. Like part of me, while listening to you talk about this the whole time, this is going to get nerdy here for a second, but there's this game called Witcher 3.
okay,
And in it, I usually don't get into games that are about magic and all this kind of stuff. And there's like werewolves. I mean, like there's a lot of lore in the game that incorporate a lot of fantasy. But I'm thinking about the hunt. You kept talking about the hunt. A lot of woods in the game. The quality of it's really good. The storyline's amazing. And I'm thinking of all the magical stuff and the gods that play a role and stuff. And I'm just thinking we're in a time now, I think people are going to get more into looking at that period. Yeah, let's not dismember animals, dismember humans. Let's stay away from some. I think we have a bit of moral intuition today to say, let's not do these things. But maybe we can rekindle the participation in some way, even if it is a metaphor.
yes,
As I was saying the other day, even your skeptic atheist friend that looked at you while you were looking at the statue probably bewildered more at you than you were at the statue in a way. I thought to myself, I've been identifying myself for now a couple years as an atheist by someone who doesn't believe there's a God, right? But then I hear you and I hear these other scholars. I've been doing this for months now, thinking to myself, like, we're narrative primates that need a story.
right,
Okay, you boiled it down, we evolved. Okay, there's not a guy in the clouds. Okay. Like at some point you hit a wall, I feel, and you go, okay, cool. I can keep repeating myself and talk about how maybe we eventually figured out the universe is eternal. Maybe all of this really is just brute fact, and there's no way we're ever going to figure out the answers of what really is the case.
Right.
Okay, now what?
right,
When am I going to make use of the moment? When am I going to go, you know what? I'm going to take these metaphors, these symbols, our traditions, find a way to interpret them in a way where it makes my world enjoyable. The furniture in my brain, I can live in that home and enjoy it, and not try to base it all down to chemical compounds and placebo. And like why not enjoy and indulge in tradition in some way that isn't harmful? And you're pondering again. She's pondering again. Anyway, let's see. Hold on. There she is. She's back.
Sorry, I don't know if I told you, I live in the forest, so I'm so sorry.
You're in the hunt. You're in the hunt.
I live in a cottage, so sorry.
I
have satellite internet.
I was just simply saying, like, at some point, when will we stop doing the shtick of just the opposite of fundamentalist Christianity and argue against it and tear down?
Right.
Instead of building up and finding ways to interpret the stuff that is less harmful, but appreciate it and enjoy it. You see what I'm saying? I don't know. That's where I'm going with it in my mind right now.
I think you're on the right path, and I think a lot of people are that. I think one of the differences about these ancient religions is that it's experiential. So you are experiencing something. Even climbing up to the temples, like sometimes when I get to the top, some of these temples are on top of mountains. And this is not a friendly environment. This is not a fun hike in the woods. Like this is blood and sweat and scratch and allergic reactions and things are trying to attack you. Okay. We can go on those stories for a long time. But so when I get to the top, sometimes I think to myself, who came up here? They brought food up here. They brought statues up here. So there's something about the experience that causes a kind of a natural connection. So even if you don't have to identify it as a god, like, you know what I mean? Like literally Artemis coming in the god shape of a hunter to me at the temple.
Right.
The experience itself is like elating. When you get to the temple, you just feel alive. when you see the views when you're up there, you're alive. And then you think about these people came up here and ate and slept and drank and danced and sang and whatever else they did. They had an experience, right? And so that's something we don't really have anymore, because we are either isolated with our own gods, like, okay, you go home and pray in your own room, or we are now in these very restrictive modes of prayer where it's like, you sit down, you kneel, you do whatever. Not everywhere. There's still a few places that are, but it's the experiential quality, I think.
Yeah.
You don't actually need a god to arrive, because when you're having one, like we talked about, like, the last place I imagine being like that is these music festivals, or the old music festivals that we used to have, and where people experience something together. And I don't know if you've ever been in these things, but these are powerful group experiences. So even if the gods are not there, you are part of something powerful, and you feel it in your body, you feel it in everywhere, and then you leave there and you just feel like, oh, that was amazing. So
yeah,
right,
it's the experience, like you said. Enjoy the experience. You can call it a placebo if you want, but look, enjoy it. Stephen Beard, wow, what a huge super chat, sending $100. I really appreciate the love and the support, my friend. Buenos Sierra din Alabama.
Buenos Aires din Alabama. He's just saying it in Romanian. Buenos Aires, Stephen. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know. I'm thinking Alabama.
Alabama. Romanians in Alabama. Yes.
Gotcha. Is ancient astronomical knowledge recorded through oral history as being the realm of gods, with temples on mountains for observation? If so, the violent nature of some gods likely refers to stuff from space causing apocalyptic events.
Yes. So, Stephen, one of the things that's come up for me a lot as I go to these temples, like I literally go to them and climb to them, is exactly that there is something very specific about the location. I haven't yet come to a conclusion about what that is, because one day I'm working on a geographical aspect of it. But I agree with you 100%. Many of these temples would have had astronomical views. The ancients seem to have incredible astronomical knowledge. And so I would not be surprised at all if we are missing an entire aspect of worship. I once heard a story about Kybele, and the archaeologists were trying to find her cave somewhere in Turkey, et cetera, et cetera. They found this one cave for her worship. And what they found fascinating was that they realized that the ancients would look for spaces where the different sounds of the drum and different instruments would create a vibration in the body that would cause an emotion. And this cave had, according to them, several sections that if you created sound in there, you'd have different experiences. So what I'm saying is that they were very much aware of how to raise vibrations, of the different astronomical aspects that were going on, different like solstice, different moons, different thing. Astrology was actually super powerful in the ancient world. I mean, today I think people make fun a little bit of astrology, like, oh, the astrology girlies or whatever, but it actually predates modern religion. I mean, it is an old, I dare say, almost mathematical, though that's not the right category, but way of working with Earth's energies and these mystical aspects that we forgot. And not only do we forget, Derek, we're dismissing them. Yeah. And I think in part we're dismissing them because they're so powerful, right? Like, so the elite started dismissing them for us and being like, what are you doing looking at the full moon? And they're coming back as well. So once again, we are in charge of our own spirituality and our own connections.
Well, I hope everybody has enjoyed this. I sure have. This has been a blast. Make sure you get a copy of her book. Let us know in the comments if you did. It makes me feel good to know that I'm doing my number one goal is to help promote the academics so that they want to come back. Because I can tell you this from talking to many of them, nothing feels better to them. I know I'm speaking for you, Carla, here, but like from the audience, and tell me if I'm wrong, from the audience, when viewers are actually taking the hard work you wrote reading and then able to go on page 84, you said this wonderful thing. I didn't really like it. Tells you people really care enough to actually absorb what you're writing and to read your materials and stuff like that. So I think the internet probably glitched a little there, but
that's okay.
Either way, I think it's the appreciation where they are reading your content. They actually know your work. They're like, you put a lot of work into this, you know?
Yes. I agree with you. I think that's 100% true. I love it when people read the work, when people have questions, when people have thoughts, when they're like, oh, this reminds me of this thing that I've read or I've learned about. And it's also really interesting for me sometimes to make these connections as well, right? Because I mean, I'm just a person. Like I can't know all of the things of all of the cultures of all of the histories of the world. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, have you seen this thing? And I'll be like, oh, that's really fascinating. That's an interesting connection. And so we create this dialogue that is not just me in a vacuum, right? And I love that. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Be sure to get a copy. Makes me feel good too, because I feel like my job is to promote you and to learn myself. I try to remain a student and learn more and more. So any final words from you to our audience? Any words of wisdom, positivity, send the vibes out there, anything?
Words of wisdom. I don't know about wisdom, but I want to say thank you for everyone who showed up. And I just feel super, super grateful that people are interested in Artemis. And I hope that this has been sort of an opening of the door into more learning about her. Because I also feel like a kind of a vessel for this information, right? Like I'm just presenting it. It's always been there, right? So I'm very excited to be here and to speak to your audience and to share all of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today, giving us your time. We look forward to next time. And ladies and gentlemen, in case you have cognitive dissonance or memory loss, never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.